In the heart of Lagos' glittering skyline stood Apex Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar tech and real estate empire built by one man, Tunde Adiwale. At just 34, Tunde was the embodiment of power, tall, striking, and commanding, with eyes so cold that employees joked his gaze could freeze a deal in midi. He was ruthless in the boardroom, calculated in speech, allergic to sentiment. To Tunde, emotions were inefficiencies, distractions that softened the sharp edge of success. He had watched his father, a once promising businessman, lose everything after falling in love and trusting the wrong people. From then, Tunde carved a vow into his heart. Love is a liability. Only logic wins. His world ran like clockwork. Breakfast meetings at 6:30 sharp. Deals closed by 10. Gym by 7 p.m. No birthdays. No holidays. No vulnerability. He had a girlfriend, Biola, a glamorous socialite with a face that belonged on magazine covers. Their relationship built more on appearances and affection. "We look perfect," she'd say. And he'd agree, because looking perfect mattered more than feeling it. That illusion cracked the night of a charity gala hosted at the Lagos Civic Center. Tunde had only attended to impress a foreign investor who admired philanthropy. But amid the glittering gowns and champagne flutes, a barefoot girl carrying a water tray stumbled before him. The tray clattered to the marble floor. Silence rippled through the crowd. Everyone turned, gasps, murmurs, embarrassment. The girl, dressed in a faded uniform, bent to pick up the glasses. Tunde's face hardened. "Can't you watch where you're going?" he snapped. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "Sorry, sir. It won't happen again." When she looked up, her eyes, dark, steady, unafraid, met his. She wasn't intimidated. Something in that gaze pierced through his composure. He turned away quickly, dismissing her like an insect. But hours later, long after the gala ended, he caught himself thinking about those eyes. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why he cared. But for the first time in years, Tunde Adiwale couldn't control what he felt. Her name was Amora Nwosu, and she had never known what it meant to belong. Abandoned as a baby at a church gate, she grew up in Our Lady's orphanage, surviving on little more than hope and resilience. By 18, she was a big sister to dozens of younger children, cooking, teaching, and protecting them. When the orphanage ran out of funds, the matron made a deal with a catering company to let the older orphans serve at events for food donations. That's how Amora ended up at the gala, balancing trays and swallowing pride. After Tunde scolded her, the room erupted in whispers. She could have bowed and walked away, but something in her snapped. She straightened her spine and said clearly, "Power without heart is poverty, sir." The hall went silent. Heads turned. Even the music stopped. Tunde's face froze. No one had ever dared talk to him like that. His assistant tugged his sleeve, whispering, "Sir, ignore her." He did, but her words clung to him like smoke. Later that night, as Amora washed dishes behind the hall, she was summoned by the orphanage matron, accused of theft. A missing bracelet from a guest had been found near her station. She cried, swearing innocence, but no one listened. By morning, she was thrown out with nothing but her clothes and a small Bible. On the streets, under the orange glow of dawn, Amora whispered to herself, "They can take everything, but not my dignity." She began walking, barefoot, toward the city, toward destiny. Weeks passed. Amora found shelter in a church basement, cleaning floors for food. One day, she overheard that a large company in Victoria Island was hiring cleaners. She applied immediately, wearing her only decent dress. The receptionist frowned when she saw her torn shoes, but accepted her application. 2 days later, she was assigned to the 29th floor, Apex Holdings. The first morning, she stepped out of the elevator and froze. The walls gleamed. The air smelled like power, and the logo on the glass door shimmered. AH, Apex Holdings. She didn't realize fate had brought her straight to Tunde Adiwale's office. At noon, Tunde walked out of his office and stopped dead. The cleaner mopping the floor was a girl from the gala. Her head was bowed, but he recognized that face instantly. "You?" he muttered. She looked up calmly. "Yes, sir. I work here now." Tunde's assistant whispered, "Should I have her replaced?" But Tunde shook his head slowly, intrigued. The rest of the day, he found himself distracted, stealing glances through the glass as she worked quietly, humming softly. When their eyes met, she smiled, not in fear, but with grace. It unsettled him. That night, in his penthouse, he tried to dismiss it. She's just a cleaner. But when he looked at the city lights from his balcony, he couldn't forget her words. Power without heart is poverty. Something inside him shifted, a crack in the marble walls around his heart. Tunde was furious, at himself. How could a girl with nothing occupy his thoughts? To prove she didn't matter, he gave her impossible tasks, cleaning boardrooms mid-meetings, polishing floors twice a day, delivering files to executives who mocked her. Amora bore it all silently. When he accused her of being too slow, she simply replied, "I'd rather be slow and careful than fast and careless, so." One day, during a crucial investor meeting with a European conglomerate, Amora mistakenly entered the conference room to replace a damaged water jug. She froze as 10 executives turned to her. Tunde's jaw clenched, but before he could yell, the lead investor laughed and said, "At least someone here is actually working." The room chuckled. Deal tension broke. The meeting went smoothly afterward and ended with a signed contract worth millions. When everyone left, Tunde stared at Amora in silence. "You got lucky," he said stiffly. She smiled faintly. "Or maybe honesty is luck's cousin, so." That night, he poured himself a glass of scotch and didn't drink it. He stood before his mirror, staring at a reflection he no longer recognized. The Ruthless CEO looked tired, alone. Humans. Days later, chaos struck. A whistleblower leaked documents showing corruption in one of Apex's subsidiaries. Media headlines screamed, "Apex under fire. CEO to resign." Tunde exploded in fury, firing staff and demanding loyalty oaths. His empire trembled. Amid the chaos, Amora found him sitting alone in the darkened boardroom, face buried in his hands. "You shouldn't see this," he muttered. She stepped closer. "So, maybe this isn't punishment. Maybe it's cleansing." He looked up sharply. "Cleansing." "Yes. Sometimes God shakes what we built on pride so we can rebuild it on truth." He stared at her, unable to speak. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not even his mother. Something in her calm voice reached a part of him that still remembered faith, warmth, and humanity. The next morning, instead of firing her, he made her his temporary assistant. "I want to understand how you think," he said flatly. From then, they worked late nights, reviewing files, strategizing damage control. He began noticing things, the way she treated every worker with kindness, how she laughed softly under stress, how she prayed before making difficult calls. One night, she fell asleep at her desk after hours of sorting reports. Tunde paused at her side, watching the faint rise and fall of her shoulders. He took off his jacket and draped it over her gently. For the first time in his adult life, the man who mocked love performed an act of love, without realizing it. And from that moment on, his heart was no longer his own. By the time dawn spilled over Lagos Lagoon, Apex's switchboard was already screaming. Bloggers dissected the scandal, analysts sniffed blood. Tunde arrived before everyone else, tie loose, sleeves rolled. He found Amora in the reception area talking to a security guard, thanking him for watching her bag overnight. It was a small thing, but the way she noticed the invisible workers of his empire unsettled him more than the headlines. "Walk with me," he said. They visited the subsidiary at the heart of the controversy, an inland logistics firm where a mid-level director had falsified invoices to butter up contract award committees. The fraud hadn't started with Tunde, but it had thrived under his culture of win or be invisible. He'd built an engine so efficient it swallowed conscience without chewing. In the car back to Victoria Island, the sea glinting like a sheet of sharpened steel, he asked, "When you said cleansing, what did you mean?" Amora watched hawkers weave through traffic, balancing goods with acrobat's grace. "Fire can destroy," she said, "but it also purifies gold. Maybe the scandal is fire." He scoffed, but the word stayed. In the afternoon, he dismissed 2 senior managers pending investigation, not to perform for the cameras, but because they had truly failed in oversight. Then he did something the old Tunde would consider heresy. He authorized a public apology. We will cooperate with regulators. The statement read, "We failed the standard we promised." Investors hissed. Employees blinked. But the city felt a subtle shift, like clouds easing off the sun. At lunch, he startled himself by asking Amora about her childhood. She told him about Our Lady's orphanage, the leaky roofs, the matron who prayed more than she slept, the children who learned math counting bottle tops and bread slices. She described a girl named Chiamaka who loved books and a boy called Jonah who never spoke unless he was singing. "I owe them more than survival," she said. "I owe them a ladder." That night, Tunde drove alone to Surulere. He stood outside the orphanage gates, paint peeling, swings rusted into stillness. He'd brought a check already signed, enough to replace the roof, restock the pantry for a year, and fix the borehole. He planned to keep it anonymous. He didn't want the gesture confused with strategy. But a journalist leaving a nearby mosque recognized him and snapped a photo. Within hours, Hashkind CEO trended. His PR team flooded his phone with exclamation marks. He ignored them and asked the carpenter to measure the gates. Back at the penthouse, Tunde stared at his reflection. The man in the glass wasn't softer, just honest. He messaged Amora, "Do the children need textbooks?" She replied instantly, "Yes, and shoes." He typed, "Done," then paused before sending. The old Tunde counted wins in revenue. Tonight he counted them in pairs of shoes. When he finally slept, it was a tiredness that didn't feel like defeat. It felt like laying down armor he no longer needed. Rumor moves faster than truth. By morning, office whispers had braided themselves into a rope. The CEO is dating the cleaner, and in turn posted a blurry video. Tunde stepping out of the elevator beside Amora, saying, "Thank you." The comment section fermented. From mop to mansion, power gap, PR romance. Meanwhile, investors who had swallowed his apology as a bitter pill now gagged on the optics. Viola arrived at Apex like a storm in designer heels. Cameras swiveled. She swept into the lobby clutching a magazine with Tunde's orphanage photo on the cover. "Is this your idea of image rehab?" she spat when she reached him, eyes hot enough to fog glass. Charity headlines and a charity girlfriend. Employee froze as a voice pinged off the marble. Amora, arms full of files, tried to glide past, but Viola stepped in her path and, before anyone could intervene, slapped her. The sound crackled through the atrium like a broken bulb. Silence. Security flinched. Phones rose. Recording. Tunde moved without thinking, standing between them. "We're done. Viola." "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Your board will eat you alive." "Maybe I'm tired of feeding them," he said quietly. He didn't know the video would rack up 1 million views by midnight. He didn't know talk shows would argue about class, gender, and the ethics of dating across power lines. He only knew 2 things. Amora didn't deserve humiliation, and the path he was on could not be walked halfway. The board summoned him to an emergency session. The chairman, a man with a handshake like a damp handkerchief, cleared his throat. "Optics. Tunde. We cannot underwrite a scandal wrapped in a romance." Another director added, "Detached from the girl, detached from the orphanage noise, detached from apologies. Announce a recommitment to shareholder value." Tunde folded his hands. "We're recommitting to values that create shareholders worth having." "You're emotional," the chairman said. "I'm awake," Tunde replied. His mother called that evening. Chief Mrs. Ediwale, elegant and iron-willed, rarely wasted words. "Love makes you weak," she warned. "Ask your father's grave." "Maybe love didn't kill him," Tunde whispered. "Maybe bitterness did." The line went quiet. A wound reopened. When it clicked off, he found Amora in the copy room sorting grant proposal for the orphanage. A thin line of red marked her cheek. "Does it sting?" he asked. "A little," she said. "Thank you for not apologizing for existing," he said, and the sentence surprised them both. She smiled, gentle and firm. "Thank you for not asking me to." Outside, Lagos breathed, Okoda's thrumming, Suya smoke ribboning into night. Inside, Tunde realized that for the first time, he wasn't performing well. He was choosing it. After the slap, paparazzi haunted the office doors. A swarm of microphones awaited Amora at the staff exit. Tunde ordered a company car to take her home, but she refused. "If I hide, the story wins," she said. Still, when a cameraman shoved close enough to fog her glasses, Tunde had had enough. He drove her himself, slipping through back streets until the city thinned and the ocean breeze cooled their nerves. "Stay at my place tonight," he said, then braced for her reaction. "I don't want gossip to be true," she replied, eyes steady, "and I won't be your secret either." He nodded. "Then come as a guest. You'll have your own room, locks and all." "A beat, please." The penthouse felt wrong the moment she entered. Too cold, too curated. She lingered by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over a quilt of lights. "It's beautiful," she said, "but it echoes." "What does your place sound like?" he asked. "Laughter, pots clanging, someone always singing off-key." He found himself grinning. "Teach me that soundtrack." In the kitchen, she opened cabinets like a tourist in a gallery, everything expensive and untouched. "Do you ever cook?" she teased. "I assemble things," he admitted, pulling out a high-end blender like a guilty secret. They made jollof together, disastrously at first. Too much pepper, a lit fiasco, rice clinging to the pot like protesters, but soon the room filled with steam and stories. She told him about studying under streetlights and hiding novels in mop buckets. He told her about his father's failed partnership and promised never to say the man's name like a curse again. Halfway through dinner, the intercom buzzed. Building concierge, 2 reporters in the lobby, asking questions about the girl. Tunde looked at Amora. She set down her spoon. "You can send them away," she said, "but one day you'll have to choose a life big enough to stand in daylight." He thought of the empty photo frames on his shelves, purchased by a designer, never filled. "I think I'm ready," he said. The next day he arranged a modest apartment for Amora near Lekki Phase 1. Safe, sunny, anonymous. She insisted on seeing the lease. "In my name," she said. "Independence is dignity." He agreed. The gesture wasn't for optics, it was respect. Meanwhile, Biola struck back. She fed a blogger a poisonous cocktail of half-truths, that Amora had targeted Tunde at the gala, that the orphan story was embellished, that the cleaner had infiltrated the executive floor. The article went live at noon. By 2, #Gold Digger trended. At 3, 2 institutional investors reassessed positions. At 4, an auditor requested older files. Inside the pressure cooker, Amora stayed calm. "If this love costs us comfort, we'll pay," she said. "But we won't pay with our character." Tunde nodded, feeling both stripped and strangely light. That evening, he watched her lead a homework circle for children in the building, using scrap paper, cracked pencils, and patience he'd never seen in a boardroom. The CFO called. "We need to cut CSR. Upticks be damned. We bleed cash." Tunde stared at the children, sounding out words, their faces bright as lanterns. "We're not cutting the ladder," he said, and hung up. Power had finally met poverty and found a mirror instead of a battlefield. Numbers don't care about redemption arcs. By the end of the quarter, Apex stock had sagged 22%. Analysts called it a culture discount. Banks whispered about covenants. The board scheduled a vote, recommend his resignation in the interest of stability. The morning of the vote, Tunde wore no tie. He read their resolution without blinking, then signed. "Effective immediately," he said, voice even. The chairman exhaled like a man released from a chokehold. "You can stay on the advisory council," someone offered, already calculating favors. "No," Tunde replied. "I need a clean page." He packed his office into a single box, a paperweight shaped like a rook, an old notebook from his first pitch, the photo of a skyline he'd meant to replace with a family picture someday. On the way out, the security guard he'd once ignored saluted. "So, thank you for the new baby formula at the gatehouse." Tunde blinked. Amora had arranged it last week. They drove to the penthouse in silence. On the dining table, his house manager had left a stack of bills that looked like a verdict. He stared at the art he never loved and the terrace he rarely used. "This place is a museum for a man who's dead," he said softly. "Then let's bury him," Amora replied. They sold the penthouse within 2 weeks at a loss he didn't mind. They donated most of the furniture to shelters and moved into a 2-bedroom walk-up that smelled like detergent and possibility. The first night, the water heater coughed like a grudging uncle, and the neighbor downstairs played Fuji music too loud. They laughed until the ceiling fan hiccuped. Tunde hunted work, not as a figurehead, but as a consultant who could help small businesses clean up governance. He visited markets where women ran empires from stalls and men tracked inventory in their heads. He taught a mechanic in Ajagun to separate personal and business accounts. He showed a tailor in Festick how to price for profit without shame. He was learning the intimacy of impact, not a headline, but a handshake. Still, bruises bloomed under joy. He missed the ease of discretionary power. He winced when strangers recognized him and whispered. One night they walked past a private club where he used to host deals. The bouncer, new on the job, blocked him gently. "Members only, so." "I used to," he began, then stopped. Amora squeezed his hand. Outside, rain fattened the air. They hurried home, drenched and laughing, eating suya under their doorway like teenagers. Later, alone at the window, he admitted the quiet ache he'd been hiding. "Did I drag you into my fall?" Amora joined him, shoulder to shoulder. "You didn't fall," she said. "You climbed down." He let the words sit like medicine under the tongue. Somewhere between the sirens and the crickets, he realized he didn't want his old life back. He wanted a truer one forward, even if built from clay and courage instead of chrome. In the morning, a letter arrived, a court summons alleging corporate fraud, fresh charges, resurrected by someone who knew where the bones were buried. The return address traced to a law firm favored by Biola's father. The old world wasn't done with him yet. "Then we fight," Amora said. "As steady as a horizon." He nodded, feeling the old engine rev, only this time. It ran on purpose, not pride. The raid came just after breakfast, men in blue windbreakers with tight lips and looser warrants. They unplugged his laptop, photographed his notebooks, and bagged a stack of files from his consultancy work. Neighbors gawked in the corridor. Someone filmed from the stairwell. Tunde answered every question without heat, but he felt a familiar chill, not fear of prison, but fear of becoming the man who weaponized control again. When the agents left, the apartment looked ransacked by an unkind wind. Amora brewed tea and set the cups on the only clear patch of table. "We will not let rage write this chapter," she said. "We'll let the truth do it." They called a pro bono lawyer recommended by a journalist from the gala, the same one who'd once seen Amora washing dishes behind the hall. Her name was Kimi, sharp as a scalpel. She listened to the charges, frowned, and said, "This smells like old enemies with new perfume." She traced the filings to a Shell subsidiary and flagged signatures that weren't Tunde's hand. "We don't just defend," she said. "We educate the court." While Kimi built the case, life insisted on happening. The landlord's son needed help with WAEC math. Tunde tutored him in the evenings, turning fractions into pizza slices and probability into dice games. Amora organized a Saturday reading club on the stairwell. Children arrived barefoot and bright-eyed, asking for stories about kings who learned to listen and girls who turned storms into gardens. One afternoon, an email pinged from a secondary school in Abadan where a teacher had seen a clip of Tunde speaking to market traders. "Can you address our students about ethical leadership?" He stared at the screen, then at the cluttered room, then at Amora. "Do I have the right?" "You have the scars," she said. "That's better." He accepted. They couldn't afford the trip, so he bartered a remote talk in exchange for a small honorarium, which they used to buy more reading books and 3 10-liter jerrycans for the building's temperamental water days. The neighbors started calling him Olga Tunde with a warmth no boredom ever gave him. Yet guilt threaded his quiet moments. He'd watch Amora sleeping, face soft, breath steady, and wonder if he'd clipped her wings. She noticed the shadow and named it. "You think you've broken my future," she said one night, "but you've given it a spine." "How?" he asked, genuinely hungry. "Because love that survives ruins is a love you can build a city on." The next morning, a knock. 2 journalists stood outside with microphones, gentler than the gossip hounds, but still hunting a headline. "Mr. Adiwale, do you regret choosing a relationship that cost you your empire?" He opened his mouth, then paused. Amora stepped forward. "We didn't lose an empire," she said. We're learning to build one that feeds people. The clip aired that evening. It didn't trend. It didn't need to. The people who mattered saw it. The teacher in Abadan, the mechanic in Ajagon, the matron at Our Ladies who texted, "I'm proud of the children you're raising, even if they are not yours yet." And then, a sliver of light. Kimi found a ledger that the prosecution had conveniently missed, a hard copy in a storage unit linking the forged contracts to a holding company quietly directed by Biola's father. It wasn't a smoking gun, it was the entire armory. "We're going to court," Kimi said, eyes flashing. "But first, we're going to the press." That night, under a fan that squeaked like a shy mouse, Tunde and Amora lay awake, fingers linked. "Whatever happens next," he said, "I won't trade this truth for my old throne." She smiled into the dark. "Good, because tomorrow, the kids are expecting story time, and their king has to show up." Outside, the city hummed. Inside, amid the ruins, love did what blueprints can't. It laid a foundation that no scandal could shake. The police cell smelled of rust and regret. For the first time in his life, Tunde Adiwale was powerless. The media that once worshipped him now fed on his downfall. Former CEO in fraud scandal blared every blog headline. His name, once a currency of respect, was now gossip. He sat on the cold bench, staring at the walls. The rhythm of dripping water echoed in the silence. Outside, Lagos roared with noise and indifference. Inside, he replayed his life choices, every handshake, every arrogant dismissal, every empty apology. His lawyer, Kimi, visited briefly. "The case is fabricated," she said, frustration lacing her voice. "But it's airtight on paper. Someone powerful wants you buried." Tunde nodded. "Biola's father," he said quietly, "is finishing what pride started." Meanwhile, Amora was waging her own war. She was rejected by journalists, insulted by old Apex employees, and mocked online as the cleaner who cursed her boss. Still, she refused to hide. Every day she visited the courthouse, holding documents, trying to speak with anyone who could help. One afternoon, an officer told her, "Madam, you can't change the system." She looked at him squarely. "Then I'll make the system see me." At night, she gathered files from Tunde's old laptop backups, spreadsheets, transaction receipts, messages, anything that could prove his innocence. She barely slept, her eyes red from tears and screen light. Inside prison, Tunde began writing letters, first to his mother, then to himself. Each page was an apology for the people he'd trampled, the love he'd mocked, the trust he'd mistaken for weakness. When Kimi returned a week later, she found a changed man. "You're smiling," she said, puzzled. "I finally met the one opponent I can't outsmart," he said. "My own reflection." He gave her a journal entry that read, "If I ever get out, I will spend my life building, not conquering." For the first time in months, Amora slept peacefully, because she knew redemption wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was forming in the fire. It was Amora who found the missing piece. While searching the orphanage storeroom for old Apex charity records, she stumbled on a dusty envelope addressed to Apex Holding Philanthropy Division. Inside was a receipt showing funds redirected from Tunde's account into a shell company, Biola's father's company. Amora froze. The date matched the one in the fraud report. It wasn't Tunde's signature. It was forged. She called Kimi immediately. "I have proof," she whispered. Kimi's tone sharpened. "Don't move. Bring it straight to me." They filed the evidence that same day. But instead of going silent, Amora made a bold move. She contacted Chaik, the journalist from the gala years ago. "You once told me the truth deserves a microphone," she said. "Now I have one worth hearing." By dawn, the headline read, "Cleaner-turned-activist uncovers fraud that jailed ex-CEO." The story exploded. Within hours, talk shows dissected the case. Social media transformed from mockery to awe. The hashtags changed. #JusticeForTunde. #The cleaner who fought back. #Love and integrity. Under pressure, the court reopened the investigation. The real documents were presented, and the judge ordered immediate release. When Tunde walked out of prison, the flash of cameras blinded him. But through the blur, he saw her, standing in the sunlight, holding a folder, eyes full of tears. He stopped, voice trembling. "You did it!" Amora smiled softly. "No, we did it. Truth did." Reporters rushed forward, but he ignored them. He walked straight to her, cupped her face, and whispered, "I mocked love once. You turned it into justice." The crowd erupted in applause. That day, Lagos witnessed not just a man freed, but a heart reborn. They had nothing, no penthouse, no empire, no title. But what they did have was purpose. Instead of returning to corporate life, Tunde and Amora began working on an idea together, the Amora Foundation for Orphans and Integrity. It started in a rented classroom with 10 desks and 1 laptop. They fed street kids breakfast before school and taught basic finance to struggling market women in the evenings. Amora handled the heart. Tunde handled the structure. One evening, Tunde said, "I used to build towers for profit. Now I want to build people for progress." Word spread quickly. Former employees volunteered. Sponsors reached out. Within months, donations began pouring in. The same media that once crucified him now hailed his transformation. But Amora kept him grounded. "Don't do it for applause," she said. "Do it because someone out there once needed you and didn't find you." He nodded, remembering the orphanage, the dirt floor, the broken gates. "Then we'll be what we didn't have," he said. The Foundation's first big project was a Lagos Youth Empowerment Summit. Hundreds attended, students, street vendors, artists. Tunde stood before them in a simple shirt, no designer suit, no guards. "My name is Tunde Adiwale," he began, voice calm but firm. "I built an empire without compassion. It collapsed. But when I learned love is not weakness, it became my greatest investment." The crowd roared. Cameras rolled. His words went viral again, but this time they healed instead of humiliating. That night, while looking up, Amora said softly, "You've changed so much." He smiled. "No, you just reminded me who I was supposed to be." And for the first time in years, the city that once watched his fall began to believe in his rise. Success attracts temptation like light draws moths. When Apex Holdings hit another crisis, the board reached out. "Tunde, we need your leadership back." They promised him his old office, full control, and double his former salary. For a moment, the offer felt like vindication, a chance to reclaim what he'd lost. Even Kimi said, "It's poetic justice. You deserve it." But that night, as he told Amora, she simply asked, "Would you fit back into that chair?" He froze. "What do you mean?" "The man who built this foundation doesn't measure worth by skyscrapers anymore," she said gently. "If you sit back in that office, you'll have power, but will you still have peace?" Tunde didn't sleep that night. He walked through the foundation's halls. Kids asleep on bunks, volunteers chatting softly, walls painted with dreams. By dawn, he had his answer. At the press conference, reporters leaned forward. "Mr. Adiwale, will you return as CEO of Apex Holdings?" He smiled faintly. "No, I'm building something larger than a company. I'm building a conscience." The crowd gasped. The quote became legend. Newspapers titled it, "From Empire to Empathy, the CEO who said no." Instead of a boardroom, he started a mentorship program called the Ladder Project, pairing successful entrepreneurs with orphans and street youths. The foundation's reach expanded beyond Lagos to Ghana, Kenya, and Sierra Leone. One evening, Amora watched him teaching kids how to pitch ideas using bottle caps as investments. Her heart swelled with pride. When he caught her watching, he grinned. "What?" "You look like a man who finally met himself," she said. He took her hand. "Maybe I did, the day I met you." It happened at sunrise, the same hour they'd first met years ago at that gala. The hall that once hosted billionaires was now transformed into the Apex Foundation Auditorium, filled with children in bright uniforms, music, and laughter. Tunde was supposed to give a speech. Instead, as Amora handed him the microphone, he took her hand and didn't let go. She frowned playfully. "You're supposed to talk to them, not me." He smiled. He turned to the audience. "Years ago, I mock a girl who spilled water at my feet. I thought love was weakness. But that girl turned out to be my compass, my courage, and my home. Geist rippled through the crowd as he slowly knelt on one knee. From his pocket, he pulled out a small wooden box, simple, hand-carved, not gold. Amora Nwosu, he said, voice trembling but proud, you cleaned my floor once, but you also cleaned my soul. Will you build the rest of this life with me? Tears flooded her eyes. She couldn't speak. The crowd erupted in cheers, children jumping, staff crying. Finally, she whispered, yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and sunlight poured through the windows, bathing them both in gold. Cameras flashed, but neither noticed. For that moment, the world disappeared, just two souls who had fought, fallen, and risen together. Outside, billboards that once carried his company logo now carried his foundation's motto, from power to purpose. And as the cheers faded into applause, Tunde whispered to her, this is only chapter 1 of forever. The wedding day dawned with rain, but instead of gloom, it felt like blessing. The sky over Lagos shimmered with mist, and the sound of drums floated from the street below the foundation hall. Tunde stood by the window, adjusting his tie, not designer, just a plain navy one Amora had ironed herself. His reflection smiled back, peaceful for once. In another life, his wedding would have been a performance, exclusive guest lists, champagne fountains, headlines. But this day was different. There were no celebrities, no gold-plated chairs, just people who had seen them through the fire, children from the orphanage, volunteers, street vendors, and a few board members who had rediscovered humility. When the doors opened, the crowd fell silent. Amora walked in wearing a white lace gown hand-sewn by the women from the Foundation's tailoring program. She carried no bouquet, only a Bible and a single lily. Behind her trailed the orphan girls she once cared for, their laughter like music. Tunde's throat tightened. He'd seen beauty before, but never truth wearing it. As she reached the altar, the pastor smiled. Marriage is not a merger, he said. It's a ministry. When it was time for vows, Amora spoke first. I once had nothing, she said. But God gave me a man who taught me that even broken people can build something unshakable. Tunde's voice cracked as he replied, I built towers of pride, but I will spend the rest of my life building you for purpose. They exchanged rings, simple silver bands forged by a blacksmith in Mushin. When the pastor said, You may kiss the bride, the hall erupted in cheers. Outside, the rain stopped. Sunlight broke through, spilling golden light over the roof. Reporters called it the wedding of grace. But those who were there called it what it truly was, a miracle that money couldn't buy. Married life for Tunde and Amora was not luxury, it was legacy. They lived in a modest home close to the Foundation headquarters, surrounded by laughter and chaos. Children ran in and out. Staff worked tirelessly. Every evening, they sat together reviewing proposals, sketching plans, and dreaming bigger. The Amora Foundation for Orphans and Integrity expanded into new cities, Port Harcourt, Accra, Nairobi. They launched scholarship programs, mentorship clinics, and street-to-startup incubators where former hawkers became business owners. When Tunde walked into classrooms, kids no longer saw CO, they saw a mentor. He taught them how to balance purpose and profit. If your business feeds you but starve your soul, he told them, you're still poor. Meanwhile, Amora led community drive for girls' education and orphan welfare. She spoke in churches, schools, and even at the United Nations Youth Summit, where her speech ended in a standing ovation. I was once called a cleaner, she told the audience. But what's wrong with cleaning? The world needs more people willing to clean hearts, systems, and streets. Their love became a living testimony. Newspapers called them Africa's power couple of purpose. But behind closed doors, they stayed humble, cooking together, playing Ludo, laughing about their first burnt jollof. One night, Tunde looked at her across the dinner table and said, I used to chase immortality through money. Now, I see immortality as leaving a mark on people who'll never forget you. Amora smiled, and that's exactly what we're doing. Years later, success brought new challenges and a ghost from their old life. One afternoon, as Amora was reviewing applications for the Foundation's Women's Grant, the receptionist rushed in. "Madam, someone's asking to see you." She says she's Biola. Amora's pen froze. Outside the office door stood Biola, once radiant, now visibly broken. Her expensive clothes were faded, her eyes tired. Word had spread that her father's company had collapsed under investigation for financial crimes. Their empire had turned to dust. "Amora," she whispered, voice trembling, "I'm not here for pity. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Amora looked at her, this woman who had once humiliated her publicly, and in that moment she felt no anger, only empathy. "You don't owe me words," she said softly. "You owe yourself forgiveness." Tunde entered the room then, his expression unreadable. Biola turned to him. "I destroyed you," she said, "and yet you built something bigger." He nodded. "You taught me the value of losing everything to find what matters." Silence lingered. Then Amora smiled. "We need a PR manager for our women's outreach. If you're serious about starting over, help us tell these women's stories." Biola blinked. "You'd hire me? After everything?" Amora touched her hand. "Grace doesn't keep score." Tears fell freely. For the first time in years, Biola felt seen, not as a villain of a scandal, but as a woman still capable of redemption. By the end of the year, Biola had rebuilt her life, quietly, purposefully. She became one of the Foundation's most passionate advocates. Forgiveness had turned enemies into family. A documentary team approached them. "We want to tell your story, the CEO and the orphan." At first, Tunde hesitated. "We've had enough cameras." But Amora smiled. "This time, it's not about us. It's about what love built." The documentary aired worldwide. It showed everything: Tunde's fall, Amora's courage, their foundation's impact, clips of orphans graduating, women opening businesses, and Tunde teaching Bayford kids under a mango tree flooded the internet. The final scene, Tunde proposing at the gala hall, brought millions to tears. YouTube comments overflowed. "I watched this crying. True love still exists." Powerful. Every CEO needs to see this. From mockery to miracle, what a journey. Major networks picked it up. Donations poured in. The Foundation expanded further, partnering with African governments to reform orphan care systems. But beyond the fame, what mattered most was how ordinary people were inspired. Mechanics, teachers, single mothers, even street hawkers began quoting Tunde's line, "Power without heart is poverty." One evening, they were invited to the National Honors Gala, where the president of Nigeria awarded them the Order of Humanitarian Excellence. As applause thundered, Amora leaned over and whispered, "You remember when you said love was weakness?" Tunde chuckled. "Yeah. Turns out, it's the only strength that lasts." The world saw two icons. But inside, they still saw each other the same way they did on that night years ago, a CEO and a girl with a tray, proving destiny writes better stories than power ever could. The air smelled of rain and earth. The orphanage at Surulere had been rebuilt. Bright blue roofs, new classrooms, laughter echoing across the courtyard. Children played football barefoot while volunteers served lunch. Tunde and Amora stood on the balcony overlooking it all. He wore simple clothes, sleeves rolled, hair flecked with gray. She stood beside him, serene, radiant as ever. Below, a little girl tugged at her skate. "Auntie Amora, is it true you used to be an orphan like us?" Amora smiled, kneeling to her level. "Yes, it's true. But you see, being an orphan doesn't mean you don't have a future. It means you get to write your own." The girl giggled. "Then I'll be like you when I grow up." Tunde chuckled. "Only if you promise to boss me around too." The courtyard burst with laughter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the city lights shimmered in the distance. Amora leaned her head on his shoulder. "Remember when I told you that God shakes what we build on pride so we can rebuild it on truth?" He nodded. "And I thought you were crazy." She smiled. "You still do sometimes." He looked out over the orphanage, their first donation, their first dream, and whispered, "I mocked love once. I thought it made men weak. But now I know it makes them eternal." The camera of fate zoomed out slowly. The former Ruthless CEO and the once penniless orphan standing side by side, symbols of grace, resilience, and rebirth. The screen fades to black. The words appear in gold. You can lose everything and still win if you find love that teaches you purpose. Hash the CEO and the orphan, hash African love story, hash from power to purpose, hash viral inspiration.